I was trimming the rosemary by the porch steps when her SUV pulled up, tires too fast for a casual visit. She stepped out like she owned the world, until she looked up, until she saw the house. Her smile slipped, her face went pale. My deal told everyone, she's broken, forgotten. But there she stood now, silent, shaken, staring at the home she never imagined I could build without her blessing. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. The chapel stood quietly on the corner of Elm and Ridgeline, white clapboard siding glowing in the soft morning light, as if the building itself understood the importance of pretending. Inside, voices murmured in polite, semi-sacred Sunday best laughter, hollow greeting, and the soft rustle of chiffon and lace. The baptism had already started by the time Grace Palmer eased open the side door, clutching her coat against her ribs as if to hold herself together. She hadn't been invited. Not by phone, not by letter, not by accident. She came anyway. The side pews were sparsely filled, a few older couples and distracted teenagers on their phones. Grace slipped into the last row, unseen but not unseen. Her eyes moved first to the front where her son Brian stood holding 11-year-old Lena in his arms as if she were still 5. The child's white dress shimmered slightly beneath the high-arched stained glass. Her hair pulled back into a tight braid, her expression practiced. She looked beautiful, but distant, far older than her years, and somehow absent behind her polite little smile. Beside them, Whitney Palmer stood like she'd been poured into the moment from a socialite magazine. Elegant pastel dress, soft curls, and a face that wore sanctity like makeup. Her hand rested lightly on Brian's back, and though her lips curled into a benevolent smile, her eyes scanned the room like a hawk's. Grace remained still, folding her hands gently in her lap. She didn't need to be seen, she just needed to be here. After the ceremony, guests filed into the adjacent reception hall, all white linens, catered canapé, and flutes of sparkling cider. Grace followed last, hovering near the door like someone on a time limit. She didn't plan to stay long, just enough to see Lena's face, to know she was okay. Whitney's voice floated above the ambient noise, sweet and sharp like lemon rind in a cocktail. "Oh, we just do what we can for her," she said, in a tone designed for listeners. "She lost everything after Harold passed. Poor thing, had to sell the house. She's really got nothing now, but we try to help when we—" Grace paused mid-step, just near the hallway arch. The words settled on her shoulders like dust. She said nothing, made no expression, just stood still long enough for her heart rate even out. She didn't even RSVP, but I told Brian, let her come. It's charity, you know? I mean, family is family, Whitney added with a hollow laugh. The guests, 2 realtors and a woman Grace didn't recognize from the country club, smiled politely, unsure how to respond. Grace caught one of their glances and offered a slight nod before turning away. Her son hadn't said a word. She found a corner near the punch table where she could watch quietly. When Lena spotted her, the girl's face lit up with something real. Without asking permission, Lena wriggled through the adult legs and plastic folding chairs to reach her grandmother. "Nana," she whispered, flinging her arms around Grace's waist. Grace wrapped her arms around the girl gently, steadying them both. "You look like an angel," she said softly. "An angel in ballet flats." Lena giggled. "You really came. Mom said you probably wouldn't." "I always come, even if no one asks me to." The girl hesitated, glancing back toward her parent. "I can't talk long." "I know," Grace said. She brushed a hand down Lena's braid, memorizing the feel of it. Before the moment could linger, Whitney's voice rang out from across the room. "Lena, honey, we need you for pictures. Now." Lena pulled back slowly. "Bye, Nana." "Bye, sweetheart. Have fun." Grace smiled and watched her go, her throat tightening like a pulled drawstring. Across the room, Pastor Dennis leaned against a wall near the refreshment. He didn't wave or call attention to, but his eyes met Grace's quiet understanding. He gave her a single nod, slow and certain, before returning to his conversation with another guest. Grace didn't linger. She turned and left through the same door she'd entered, the air outside suddenly feeling cleaner, less tight. The parking lot was nearly empty now, save for a few minivans and SUVs with car seat mirrors visible in the back windows. Her older sedan sat alone in the far corner, unobtrusive, overlooked, just like her. She slid into the driver's seat, rested her hands on the wheel, and exhaled long and low. The silence inside the car was deeper than it should have been. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She didn't move for a moment. letting it ring once more before reaching. One notification lit up the screen. Offer accepted. Congratulations. Welcome home. Grace stared at the message. Her reflection in the phone screen looked nothing like the woman Whitney had described in a long pause. Then, slowly, her lips curved up. Let them whisper. She had plans now. The house was small, but neat, tucked between two faded bungalows on the quieter end of Sycamore Avenue. Grace had chosen it for the light. The front windows caught the sunrise just right in the morning, and in the evening, the air held the quiet hum of wind chimes from her neighbor's porch. She kept the place clean, almost reverently, not out of pride, but because it was hers. For now, the walls, though modest, held no shame. The furniture was older, inherited, but well. The dining table had only 2 chairs now. She'd sold the matching set after Harold died, telling herself she didn't need them. She still wasn't sure if that had been grief talking or clarity. On the mantel sat a framed photo of Lena, age 5, with her cheeks puffed out mid-laugh, her hand covered in birthday cake frosting. Grace hadn't been at that party. She hadn't even known about it till a neighbor mentioned it weeks later. That's when it had started. Quietly, efficiently. A removal here, a block there. At first, Grace thought it was a mistake. The holiday invitation never came. The school performance she usually got a flyer for somehow slipped by. But then she noticed she couldn't view Whitney's Facebook, then Brian. Then Lena's account vanished altogether. She opened the group chat they'd always used for planning birthdays and Sunday potlucks, and saw it had been renamed without her. A new thread, one she hadn't been added to. Grace didn't ask questions. She simply muted her phone, turned off the screen, and went back to folding her laundry. Dignity, she had learned, wasn't something others could give or take. It was something you kept or you lost. Each evening she cooked for herself. Real food, not just something out of a box. She lit a candle, played old records. She had dinner with the silence like it was a guest she knew well. And then, after the dishes were washed and her second cup of tea was she'd open her laptop. It wasn't that she stalked them. That word felt juvenile. She simply looked. School newsletters that still listed Lena's name, local event flyers with photos of the children's choir, a tagged post on another parent's Instagram. There was Lena, standing in the back row of the Christmas pageant, her angel wings askew. Grace zoomed in slowly, recognizing the tilt of her granddaughter's head, the way she always fiddled with the hem of her dress when she was nervous. None of these moments had been shared with her. She watched in silence, not with bitterness, but with an ache that had settled somewhere below the ribs and refused to. She didn't cry. Grace had never been a weeper. She simply memorized every stolen frame of Lena's life, filing them away like puzzle pieces she was forbidden to complete. One Thursday evening, after a long walk along the river trail, she came home to find someone waiting at her porch, legs crossed, bottle of red wine in hand, wearing too much lipstick and a windbreaker that had seen better decades. Still allergic to Cabernet? Joy asked, holding up the bottle like a flag. Grace blinked, then smiled. Only if it's cheap. Good, Joy said, because this one costs more than my gas bill. They sat on the back porch while dusk faded into a soft navy blue hush, crickets tuned up in the hedges. Grace poured the wine into chipped mugs. Her last 2 wine glasses had cracked in the dishwasher, and she hadn't bothered to replace them. Joy didn't make small talk. She just looked at her old friend with the kind of blunt affection only someone who knew your high school secrets could offer. So, she said finally, you gonna tell me why your daughter-in-law is parading around town like she's your damn legal guardian? Grace sipped slowly. The wine was bold, earthy. It hit the back of her throat like a memory. Because letting people think I'm broken, she said, is easier than explaining I'm just done asking for permission. Joy gave a short laugh. Well, hell, that's a headline. They talked late into the evening, about Harold, about Lena, about what it felt like to be erased from your own family's. Joy didn't offer. She offered names, contractors, financial advisors, real estate lawyers. She knew people. At some point, Grace reached for her phone again. She scrolled to the real estate agent's email, thumb hovering over the confirm appointment button. She tapped it without hesitation. Tomorrow, she'd walk through the property again, this time with the final blueprint, because being invisible was one thing, but being underestimated? That was something. The brunch was held at the Westwood Conservatory, a place where the napkins were linen, the smiles were lacquered, and the parking lot smelled faintly of leased European engine. Grace arrived just before the welcome, stepping out of her car with precision, wearing a soft navy dress and a pair of cream leather flats that had belonged to her mother. She didn't need to dress like money. She simply walked like she had nothing to prove. The event was in full bloom by the time she made her way past the host table. Whitney stood near the floral arch, smiling in every direction at once, shaking hands like a congressional candidate. Her dress was loud, a blush pink ruffle affair that looked better on Instagram than in person. She was flanked by the local school board president and a woman from the Rotary Club. Cameras flashed softly. Grace moved through the garden like she'd been coming to events like this all her life, which, in truth, she had. Back when Harold used to shake hands and pose for boardroom photos, that part of her life had never been loud, just quietly powerful. "Mrs. Palmer?" a woman asked gently, stopping Grace near the mimosa bar. "Are you Brian's mother?" Grace turned. The woman was warm-faced, wearing tortoise-shell glasses and a silk scarf that probably cost more than Grace's rent. She looked delighted, not condescending. "I am," Grace replied. "Well, I thought I recognized. It's been years. You look gorgeous. What are you doing with yourself these days?" Before Grace could answer, Whitney swooped in like a hawk circling her perimeter. "Oh, hi Claire. Didn't realize you knew Grace." "Yes, she's keeping busy. Mostly retired. Lots of little projects." Grace didn't blink. "I've been house hunting again," she said casually, reaching for a scone. The woman's brows lifted, intrigued. "Really? That's exciting. You thinking of staying in town?" "Mountainside," Grace replied. "Something custom. It's time." Whitney's laugh was polite but brittle. "Oh, you mean like a fixer-upper, right? My friend does staging. Maybe I can pass along her info." Before Grace could answer, another voice, "Excuse me, sorry to interrupt." A tall man in a charcoal blazer stepped into their circle, holding a glass of iced tea. His presence didn't announce itself, but it settled quickly, like someone used to being listened to. Grace turned and met his gaze. "Grace Palmer?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I'm Ethan Moore. We have a mutual connection. Joy Harmon?" Grace smiled. "Of course. Joy has a talent for knowing who I need before I do." He chuckled. "She insisted I find you." Whitney's smile flickered, but she recovered fast, extending a manicured, "Hi, I'm Whitney Palmer, Grace's daughter-in-law." Ethan shook her hand, polite but brief, then turned back to Grace. "I heard you're exploring some property in the Hill District?" "I am," Grace replied. "I signed papers Good choice. That area's booming, but the view's worth every penny." Claire leaned in. "Is this for a flip or something long-term?" "Oh, it's permanent," Joy said from behind them, stepping in with 2 glasses of champagne and her signature too loud entrance. "She's building a home. 6-bedroom, mountain-facing, private driveway, mature trees. Ethan's funding part of the design." Whitney stiffened. "Wait, Ethan? As in Ethan Moore? The Ethan Moore? Westridge Holdings?" Ethan gave a humble nod. "That's me. But mostly these days I just build for people I trust." Whitney's voice faltered. "But I didn't realize Grace was capable?" Grace asked, her voice quiet but pointed. Whitney blinked. No, of course not. I just didn't hear anything about this." Grace took a sip of her drink, then set the glass down gently on the tray of a passing. "Funny how that happened." Across the lawn, someone snapped a candid photo of Grace and Ethan laughing. A few guests wandered over to ask questions. Whitney hovered for a moment, then peeled away, her posture tightening, her smile dimming. As the brunch continued, Whitney circled the space like a hostess trying to reclaim control of a conversation she hadn't heard start. Her voice was higher now, more strained. She laughed too loudly, lingered near Ethan, tried twice to steer the topic back to her foundation's digital camp, but it was no longer her room. Grace stood near a hydrangea bush, chatting with 2 retired professors about sustainable land development. She didn't need to flex. Her presence did it for her. Later that afternoon, back at her rental, Grace walked barefoot across the kitchen tiles, humming softly as she opened her laptop. An email from her financial advisor sat at the top of her inbox. Balance update, Palmer Estate Holding, liquid cash. Position, $3,217,809.48. She scrolled down without emotion, just verifying numbers, confirming transfer. In the distance, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She let it ring. The woman Whitney thought she'd buried was not only alive, she was building. And Whitney? She was finally starting to sense it. Whitney Palmer tapped the steering wheel of her SUV with a manicured finger, staring down at her phone screen like it owed her an explanation. The brunch had ended over 24 hours ago, but the aftertaste lingered bitterly. Grace's dress, Grace's guest list, Grace's casually dropped phrase. I signed papers last week. House hunting? Custom build? 6 bedrooms? Since when? She opened the Notes app on her phone and stared at the short list she'd made while pretending to care about Claire's vegan quiche recipe. Mountain View property. Grace Palmer, purchase. Ethan Moore, West Ridge Holding. Joy Harmon, connections? Whitney wasn't used to being blindsided. It felt unnatural, like wearing a size too small and trying not to wince. She called the first real estate office on her list. Hi. Yes, this is Whitney Palmer. My family's been looking into the Mountain View development area, and I've heard a relative might be purchasing something nearby. A Grace Palmer? I just wanted to check if she's been working with your firm. A pause, then a carefully neutral voice. I'm afraid we can't confirm or deny anything involving client transactions. We maintain strict confidentiality, Ms. Whitney chuckled. Of course, I totally get that. It's just a family thing. I'm planning a surprise for her. Housewarming. The woman didn't budge. Still, I'm sorry. We have NDAs on all our luxury. Whitney's smile dropped the second she wasn't used to people telling her no, and certainly not for Grace. She tried 2 more firms. Same answer. The last one was slightly more revealing. Well, I don't have access to her file directly, the man said, hesitant. But I know she's working with one of our senior partners, and that Ethan Moore is involved. Westridge's team usually handles custom investments. Whitney's grip on the phone tightened. Ethan's funding it? Ma'am, I really can't say, but he already had. Whitney opened her laptop the moment she got home, typing Ethan Moore Westridge Holding to the search bar like she was hunting down a. The first 5 pages were glowing. Forbes mentioned luxury builds in Aspen, Carmel, Sedona, a quiet billionaire who kept to himself and backed projects that prioritized beauty over flash. Pictures showed him shaking hands at ribbon cutting, standing with retired athletes and philanthropists. Her mouth went dry. She clicked over to her Instagram app. Ethan had no public profile, no tags, nothing she could use, so she grabbed her keys. 20 minutes later, she was driving up the winding road that cut through the hills east of town, passing through a gate marked private construction traffic. She slowed near the gravel turnoff. No signage, just a stretch of recently poured foundation, tall timber beams rising like ribs from the red clay. 2 trucks idled near a row of porta potties. A man in a hard hat turned as she pulled up. Hi, Whitney chirped, rolling down her window. Sorry, my mother-in-law's building here. Grace Palmer? I'm just trying to check something on finishes for the upstairs. He didn't move. No visitors, he said flatly. This is a closed site. But I'm family, still not on the list. She tried again, voice lighter. You don't understand. He reached for his walkie. Want me to call site security? That did it. Whitney threw the car into reverse, smiled tight as fishing line, and backed out without another word. Gravel pinged the undercarriage as she sped downhill. By the time she got home, her nails had left half-moon impressions in her palms. Grace wasn't just playing rich. She was locked into something big, something real. And she wasn't sharing the details. That silence, more than anything, rattled Whitney. Inside the small rental house across town, Grace sat at her worn kitchen table, the surface clean and cleared except for 2 documents, a final blueprint and a title deed. Her pen moved slowly, gracefully, across the last signature. The notary across from her smiled. Congratulations, Miss Palmer. As of today, the land is yours. Grace nodded, calm and unreadable. Thank you. She didn't ask for copies. She already knew what they said. As the notary left, she poured herself a glass of water and stood by the window. Outside, the neighbor's wind chimes picked up with the breeze, a soft metallic lullaby against the fading afternoon. Her phone buzzed once, a text from Joy. Whitney just tried to crash the build site. Heard she got turned away? Grace allowed herself the faintest smile. Let her chase shadows. The foundation had already been poured. The school auditorium smelled like old carpet and lemon disinfectant, the air humming with the quiet chaos of folding chairs, juice boxes, and parents checking their phones between songs. The sign outside had read, Spring Strings Recital, grades 3 through 6. Grace hadn't known about it until Joy forwarded a school flyer that someone had posted to a neighborhood Facebook group. Grace wasn't part of any. She came anyway. She slipped into the back of the auditorium just as the second piece began, a clumsy but charming rendition of Ode to The stage lights blurred the children's faces, but she spotted Lena in second row, third from the left. Her granddaughter's concentration was intense, bow hand trembling slightly. The same wrinkle formed between her brows that Grace remembered from when Lena first tried to write in cursive. No one noticed Grace standing near the exit, and that was just fine. About 6 rows ahead, Whitney sat poised with her legs crossed and her phone tilted at an angle that looked like it was recording. But Grace knew better. She was probably checking views on her last Brian sat beside her, expression flat, hands folded tightly in his lap. He didn't look left or right, not at his wife, not at the stage, certainly not behind him. Whitney glanced over her shoulder once. Her gaze landed on Grace, and then, like a switch, her smile vanished. She turned back toward the stage without acknowledging her. Grace didn't move. She stayed until the last off-key note, until the polite applause rose and fell, and parents began standing to make a show of pride. Whitney clapped like she was at a gala. Brian barely moved. Grace waited until the aisles were clogged with conversation and half-hearted goodbye. She slipped out a side door before anyone could pretend not to see. The parking lot buzzed with engines and hurried parents gathering dinner-planning cars. Grace walked to the far end, where her new silver hybrid sat gleaming under a lamppost. It still had that faint smell of dealership leather and lavender sachet. She hadn't parked it out front. Not yet. Let the build speak first. She was unlocking the driver's side door when she heard the shuffle of hurried footsteps behind her. Nana. She turned. Lena was running across the lot, her violin case thudding against her side, her braids slightly unraveling. She reached Grace, breathless and wide-eyed. "You really came," she said, like it was a secret. "Of course I did," Grace said, reaching out gently to steady her. "They didn't tell me you were coming." "I know." Lena looked down, twisting the strap of her. "I wanted to text you. Mom said I couldn't." Grace knelt a little, looking her in the eye. "I'm always where I need to be, sweet, even if you don't see." The girl hesitated, then glanced behind her toward the crowd thinning near the auditorium. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." Lena's voice dropped to a whisper. "Are you really poor?" Grace blinked, then gave a soft, amused smile. "What do you think?" Lena looked at the car behind them. Sleek, new, quiet as a secret. "That's yours?" she asked, barely loud enough to be heard. Grace stood slowly, pressing the key fob until the lights. "Yup." Lena reached out like she wasn't sure she was allowed to touch the hood. "It doesn't smell like your old one, because it's not my old." A pause. Then, almost as an afterthought, Grace added, "The keys are yours whenever you need me." The girl looked up, eyes round. "Really? Really?" Footsteps echoed behind them. Whitney's voice sliced through the parking lot. "Lena!" The girl flinched, pulling back instinctively, and turned toward the sound. Brian trailed behind Whitney, his hands still shoved into his coat pocket, his eyes finding Grace for only a fraction of a second before looking down again. "I gotta go," Lena whispered. Grace nodded once. "Go on?" Lena took a few steps, then stopped and, "Thank you for coming." Grace watched her go. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just stood still as the child she loved walked back toward a life that had tried to erase her. Inside the car, she gripped the steering wheel for a long moment before turning the key. Her phone buzzed in the center console. A text from Joy. "That woman's rattled. You should have seen Whitney's face when you walked in. You just became the ghost she can't outrun." Grace pulled out of the parking lot without looking back. The ice hadn't just cracked. It had started to break. The kitchen was too quiet. Brian stood by the sink, rinsing out a coffee mug he hadn't used, the water running longer than necessary. Whitney leaned against the island, arms folded, tapping her acrylic nails against the marble like a metronome ticking toward confrontation. "She posted a picture," Whitney said sharply. "No caption, no location, just a house that screams old money." Brian didn't look up. "It's not illegal to post a house." "It's manipulative," she snapped. "She's flaunting." He shut off the water, dried his hands slowly. "Or maybe she's just living." Whitney scoffed. "Don't be naive. She's doing this to embarrass me." Brian turned, finally meeting her gaze. "Did you actually say she was broke?" Whitney blinked. "Excuse me?" "At the baptism. I heard you. So did half the room." Her expression twitched, just for a second. "I was making conversation. People ask questions, I give answers." "You called it charity, Whitney." Her tone turned icy. "What? Now you're defending her? After all she put you through?" Brian didn't answer right away. He walked past her to the fridge, opened it, stared at the shelves like they might offer something stronger than almond milk and judgment. She lost her husband, and then her home. And then her place, in her own family. Whitney's mouth twisted. She chose distant. I just set boundaries. Or built walls. She stiffened. This is rich. Coming from the man who can't even log into his own daughter's school portal without asking me for the password. Brian shut the fridge. You're not the only one who knows how to change password. For a moment, the air thinned. Across town, Grace sat on her porch steps, a mug of tea warming her palm. The sky above was soft with gathering cloud. September in the mountains always flirted with sudden storm. She took a deep breath, opened her phone, and scrolled to her photo album. There it was, the front elevation of the new house, fresh paint, stonework still curing, the trees surrounding the lot like quiet sentinels. It wasn't furnished yet, but it didn't need to be. The bones of it told a story loud enough. She tapped share, opened Facebook, and uploaded it without a word. No caption, no tags, just the image. By dinner, it had 36 likes. By midnight, it had over 100. Stunning, Grace. Wait, is this yours? Did I miss something? Wow, girl, didn't even know you were still in town. Old Bridge Club friends, church member, former PTA mom, even someone from Harold's old unit who hadn't commented on anything in years wrote, Harold would have loved this view. Pastor Dennis sent her a private message. Welcome back. The town feels more like itself with you in it. Grace sipped her tea slowly. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Meanwhile, at Whitney's foundation office downtown, her assistant knocked once before stepping in. You might want to see this, the girl said nervously, holding up a printed email from a key sponsor. Whitney scanned it quickly, then again. Her chest tightened. After recent revelations about discrepancies between your stated family background and verified public information, we've decided to withdraw support. We wish you well in your future endeavors. Whitney dropped the paper, reaching for her phone. Her perfectly curated online world was starting to unravel, and she could feel the edges fray. That night, Brian sat on the edge of the guest bed with his laptop open, scrolling through Lena's old 529 college savings, or what was left of it. Where's the rest of it? He murmured. Whitney, brushing her hair in the mirror, didn't answer. She kept brushing. Why are there multiple withdrawals for strategic digital marketing? What is that? Still brushing. Are you telling me, he said, louder now, that you used Lena's college fund to pay for fake followers? For press coverage? Whitney froze. The brush slipped from her hand and hit the hardwood with a hollow thud. Say something, he said. She turned slowly, her face pale under the warm vanity light. You don't understand how things work. You think people just notice you without making... Brian stood, his voice suddenly low and clear. She never needed noise. Whitney's lips parted, searching for a retort. None came. Across town, Grace's phone buzzed one more time. She glanced at the screen. Brian. She didn't answer. Not yet. Let them sit in the storm they started. The envelope was black, deep, velvety, and almost too elegant for a mailbox. The return address was stamped in gold foil. No logo. Just a name. Grace Palm. Inside, the cardstock invitation read like something from a gala, not a woman who had supposedly vanished from the social map. You are cordially invited to an evening of conversation, community, and new beginnings. Saturday at 5:30 p.m. Private residence, 233, Whispering Ridge Lane Cocktail. Valet provided, adults. Whitney stared at it. Encounter might catch fire. Her first instinct was to roll her eyes. Her second was to check if she'd been the only one who got it. She wasn't. Claire posted a photo of hers on Facebook with the caption, "Look who's back." Joy Harmon's daughter tweeted, "If you know, you know. Grace Palmer's throwing a housewarming and I already feel underdressed." By the time Saturday arrived, Whispering Ridge buzzed with curiosity. The house, finally complete, stood like something out of a design magazine. Tucked behind tall cedar trees, its long driveway curved elegantly through a stone entrance lined with soft uplighting. Not a single sign of new money or overdone wealth, just quiet comfort. Whitney's heels clicked aggressive. She stepped out of the car. Her dress was floor-length crimson with beaded cuffs, more suited to a gala than a house party. She'd chosen it for drama, for spectacle. Brian, walking a step behind her in a muted navy blazer, looked like he wanted to disappear into the landscape. The valet took the keys and opened the passenger door without a word. Music floated out from the backyard, live cello and soft jazz, wrapped around the scent of rosemary shortbread and lemon zest. Catering staff in black served champagne off silver trays. The lighting was warm but intentional, just dim enough to make the property glow. Joy greeted guests at the front door like she'd been born for this role, clipboard in hand, earpiece in place. The kind of woman who could make a modest party feel like an exclusive retreat. She spotted Whitney and gave a smile that didn't quite touch her eyes. "So glad you could make it." Whitney returned it with a tilt of the head. "Lovely to be invited." Brian lingered behind, unsure whether to follow Joy's lead or stick by his wife. Inside, the house was breathtaking. Open floor plan, natural wood accents, soft gold fixtures that caught the light in all the right ways. Guests whispered compliments under their breath, trailing their fingers along smooth countertops and stepping into hallways lined with black and white portraits of Grace's Harold in uniform, Lena as a toddler. Even one photo of a much younger Grace standing in front of a courthouse with a winning smile and a real estate in her hand. In the center of it all stood Grace, a slate gray dress, pearl earring, no labels, no flash, but impossible to ignore. She looked rested, grounded, like someone who had walked through fire and come out asking for no one's. Ethan stood beside her, greeting guests with a glass of scotch and a quiet nod. He blended in so seamlessly it took a moment for most to realize who he was. When Whitney saw him, her posture straightened. She waited until Grace stepped away to speak to someone from the city planning committee, then crossed the room toward Ethan with a practiced smile. "Lovely party," she said, holding out her hand. He shook it briefly. "Thank you." Grace did most of it. "Oh, she's always had good taste," Whitney said, scanning the room. "I just didn't realize she was doing all this alone." Ethan glanced sideways. "She's not." Whitney's lips parted, but the conversation ended there. Guests gathered near the fireplace, admiring a custom-built bookshelf that featured first editions of American literary classics, and, in the center, a single photo of Grace and Lena, arm in arm, both, mid-laugh. A spontaneous, unscripted moment. Whitney tried 3 times to insert herself into conversation. Each time, someone politely shifted the topic back to Grace, her vision, her design, her generosity. By the end of the night, she had become a background extra whom she once assumed she owned. Brian stood by the back patio, watching Grace laugh with a small group near the fire pit. He hadn't spoken to her, not directly, but he was watching her the way people do when they realize they've misjudged for years. Whitney reached for another glass of wine. Joy, standing just behind her, leaned in quietly. "You don't look well, sweetheart." Whitney stiffened. "I'm fine." "Of course you are," Joy replied. "You're just not used to being unremarkable." Whitney turned to say something, but Joy had already moved on, clipboard in hand, managing a valet schedule that ran smoother than any of Whitney's charity. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, and inside, Grace stood taller than the house she'd built. The party had thinned to a soft hum. Valets whisked cars down the driveway. Champagne flutes stood abandoned on side tables. The cello player had packed up and left, and Joy was upstairs checking catering invoices with the precision of a war general. Grace stood by the kitchen sink, her heels off, toes curling lightly into the cool slate tile. She was placing the last of the dessert fork into the dishwasher when she heard footsteps behind, heavy, hesitant. Brian. He hovered near the island, hands in his pocket, tie slightly loosened like he hadn't decided whether to leave or stay. "I didn't expect you to still be here," Grace said without turning around. "I wasn't sure I'd come," he replied, "but I wanted to talk. If you'll let me." She dried her hands on a linen towel, folded it carefully, and placed it on the counter before meeting his eye. He looked older than he had 6 months ago, creased around the mouth, shoulders slumped as if carrying too many years. Not the boy who used to ride his bike down Oak Street with a scraped knee and a popsicle smile, but not quite the man she had hoped he'd become either. "I know I let things slide," Brian said quietly. "I watched Whitney ice you out. I didn't speak up when it." Grace said nothing. Her silence was not cold, it was studied. "I thought I was keeping the peace," he went on, voice rough, "but all I did was let you slip away. Lena too." Still, she waited. Brian cleared his throat. "I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't think she'd cut you off completely. But the truth is, I let it happen. I chose the path of least resistance." Grace leaned back against the counter, crossing her arms loosely. "You didn't let it die, Brian. You killed it, piece by piece." His face crumpled. He turned away for a second, then back again, his eyes glistening. "I know. God, I know. I just didn't think I'd wake up one day and realize my daughter barely knows her grandmother, that I stood there while you were erased." He ran a hand through. "I see Lena change, pulling in. And I can't blame. She's watching us teach her how family works, and what she's learning isn't good." A tear slipped down his cheek. He didn't brush it away. "She deserves better," he whispered. Grace nodded. "She's not the only one." That landed like a stone in the center of the room. Brian lowered himself onto a stool at the island, resting his arms on the granite. I thought what Whitney wanted was normal, that it was just the modern way of boundaries and space and control. But it's not. It's fear and pride and branding. God, we turned our family into a brand. Grace walked over slowly and poured a glass of water. She handed it to him without a word. He drank half before setting it down. I don't expect you to forgive me tonight, he said. I don't even expect a second chance. But I needed you to hear it from not Joy, not Lena, me. Grace studied his face, the same face that once came with clay hands on Mother's, the boy she raised, the man who forgot. She exhaled. What are you going to do about it? Brian looked up, startled. You've said your part, she continued. But words are weightless unless they carry something behind them. So what now, Brian? He hesitated. I don't know yet, but I want to learn how to be her father, not Whitney's assistant. A pause. Grace looked past him, out the wide kitchen window, to the backyard where the fire pit still glowed with fading embers. I'll be here, she said finally, not waiting, just here. Brian stood slowly, something unspoken passing between them like a fragile, invisible thread. He reached for her hand, and for the first time in years, she didn't pull away. The doorbell rang just after 4 o'clock on a Wednesday. Too late for deliveries, too early for neighbors, and far too unexpected for coincidence. Grace looked up from the emails she'd been sorting at the table. The light outside had that flat, gray stillness that comes before it, and the porch camera hadn't yet sent a motion alert. She moved slowly, smoothing the creases in her linen blouse as she walked through the foyer and to the front door. Through the frosted glass panel, she saw the silhouette before the face. Whitney. Grace didn't flinch. She opened the main door but kept the screen locked, standing behind the mesh like a woman who had nothing to hide and no reason to invite chaos in. Whitney stood perfectly straight in a beige trench coat, hair styled to editorial perfection, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Her hands were folded in front of her, a leather envelope clutch pinched beneath her arm. Hi, Grace, she said, voice light, almost. Grace said nothing. Whitney hesitated, then smiled, small, controlled. I wanted to apologize. Grace tilted her head slightly. For what exactly? A flash of discomfort passed across Whitney's face, quickly masked by a breathy laugh. For everything, the way things unfolded. I think we've both said and done things we regret. I didn't say anything I regret, Grace said simply. Whitney blinked. I made choices, and I stand by them. I just think, Whitney began, then paused. Her voice lowered slightly, as if trying to sound measured, reasonable. There's a lot of talk going around town right now. You've been posting things. Grace raised an eyebrow. Photos of my house? Well, yes, but with context. People are assuming things. I haven't told anyone anything. But you implied, she said, eyes sharpening. There are rumors now about my foundation, my marriage, that I cut you off, that I stole from Lena's college fund. Didn't you? Grace asked, calm as a windless day. Whitney's nostrils flared, the mask slipping for half a second. I came here in good faith. No, Grace said, stepping just slightly closer to the door. You came here in panic. There's a difference. Whitney drew herself up. I was protecting my family's image. Everything I've done, every decision, was about that. Grace's hand rested lightly on the doorframe. And I'm rebuilding mine, brick by brick. You made sure I disappeared. Now I'm making sure people remember. Whitney's smile vanished entirely. This feels hostile, she said. Grace's voice never rose. No, it feels earned. There was a beat of silence between them. Two women, neither moving, neither blinking, the air thick with what hadn't been said for years. Whitney shifted her clutch to her other hand. You're leaving me no choice. Is that a threat? Whitney's jaw tensed. If this continues, these insinuations, this character assassination, I'll have to consider legal action, defamation, harassment, public slander, all of it. Grace didn't even blink. Through the screen, her face was unreadable, controlled, centered. You're welcome to try, she said. But just know, I've documented everything. Whitney's lips parted but no sound came. And if you think I'm scared of a courtroom, Grace can. You've forgotten who taught your husband how to argue his first debate case. That hit harder than either of them expected. Whitney's throat bobbed once, her facade cracking just slightly. Grace didn't press further. She didn't need to. She had already won the moment. Whitney stepped back from the porch, clutch now pressed tightly to her chest. She opened her mouth once more, then closed it. Grace waited until her heels clicked down the front steps and onto the gravel drive before she gently locked the storm door. She stood for a moment, breathing in the silence, Then she turned, walked back into her house, and sat down at the table. Her phone buzzed. A new email. Subject line. Invitation. Community Planning Board. Advisory seat nomination. Grace smiled without showing her teeth. Let the visitor run back to her world of glass. This house was made of stone. The music room hadn't existed in the original. It was supposed to be a guest bedroom, just another square of polished hardwood and tasteful. But the first time Grace walked through the finished house, she stopped in the doorway, stared at the light falling through the long east-facing window, and saw something different. Now, the old upright piano sat against the far wall, freshly tuned. Sheet music rested in tidy stacks beside it. A warm-toned reading lamp stood nearby, casting a soft halo over the... You remember how she used to fidget with her hem before recitals? Asked Mrs. Langley, Lena's former music teacher. She stood beside Grace, hands folded, eyes misty with something between nostalgia and awe. She still does, Grace replied, smiling faintly, but now she has a car ride home where no one critiques her boho. Mrs. Langley placed a metronome. You really meant it, didn't you? Grace looked over. Mean what? When you said this house wasn't just for you. Grace didn't answer. She didn't have to. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, the music room came alive again. Not with recitals or polished performances, but with learning, with laughter and mistakes, and the gentle clunk of progress. Lena wasn't the only student. 2 other children joined after school, their parents offering homemade casseroles and garden flowers of payment. Grace accepted everything with grace and no expectation. The room next door had become something else entirely. Where there was once a second guest, now stood a reading room, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, 2 oversized armchairs, and a coffee cart stocked with herbal teas and store-brand biscotti. It wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. On Thursday mornings, 4 local widows gathered there, sipping tea and sharing more than stories. They talked about real things: estate battle, loneliness, adult children who stopped calling. Grace didn't lead the group, she simply hosted it. And somehow, that was more powerful. Joy handled the nonprofit paperwork of press releases, grant applications, local partnerships. She'd turned the old sunroom into an office with bulletin boards and folders labeled in neat black Sharpie: widow resources, community music, civic involvement, legacy program. You realize, Joy said one afternoon, you've basically created the anti-Whitney. Grace looked up from her desk, amused. I didn't do it to spite her. I know, Joy said, flipping through a folder. But it's a damn satisfying side effect. Later that month, Ethan returned from a business trip with a bottle of wine and a proposal, one written on heavy linen paper with figures in the margin. A senior living community, he said, laying it out on the dining table. Low profile, high integrity, no marble fountains, no flash. Just good care, honest structure, and dignity for people like us when we're ready. Grace ran her fingers over the site plan. What do you need from me? Capital and vision. You've got both. She didn't answer right away. She stood, poured 2 glasses of wine, and walked to the window overlooking the back porch where Lena had planted daffodils last week. I'm in, she said. Ethan raised his glass. To legacy. Grace clinked her glass against his. Not luxury. On Sunday, the town gathered at First Hope Church for the dedication of the new garden bench, placed just beneath the large oak tree in the back lawn. A small brass plaque was screwed into the center slat. In memory of quiet strength, Grace Palmer, donated by Pastor Dennis and the Community Fellowship Count. Grace said nothing to the unveiling. She simply ran her hand along the grain and sat for a moment, letting the fall wind lift the corners. I remember when people used to pity, someone whispered behind her. Now they quote you. She stood, nodded politely, and walked back toward the parking lot. Her phone buzzed. New message, West Valley Women's. We'd be honored to offer you a seat on our board of directors. Your vision for quiet leadership and restorative work aligns with everything we stand for. Welcome, Grace. The same board Whitney had once boasted about in every conversation. The same board that had dropped her after the truth surfaced. Grace stared at the message for a long moment. Then she tapped accept. She didn't send a screenshot, didn't post it. She simply closed the message and walked to her car, her shoes crunching leaves that hadn't fallen yet. A race. Legacy wasn't what you left behind. It was what you built while they watched. It started with a blog post, not even a major outlet, just a quiet piece from a mid-level lifestyle blogger in Seattle who reviewed boutique products and kept a running list of authentic influencers to watch. The post was titled, Who's really behind these endorsements? And featured a now familiar photo of Whitney Palmer holding a limited edition clutch with a caption that read, "Gifted by La Maison du Rêve." Only, the brand didn't exist. The post included screenshots of trademark filing, none, domain lookup, anonymous redirect. A few more examples followed: jewelry piece, skincare line, international partnership. Every one of them led back to the same shell account, tied to promotional invoices billed through a marketing agency Whitney had registered herself 6 months earlier. By Friday morning, 3 other bloggers had picked it up. By Sunday, a local journalist had filed a deeper dive with the West Valley Herald titled, "The Image Machine: How One Foundation Executive Manufactured Luxury Ties and Lost Herself." The article was brutal, if understated. It cited financial records showing repeated transfers from nonprofit funds to marketing, cross-referenced with event photos and sponsor tags. Nothing was fabricated, just followed, traced, laid bare. Grace read it once, then again. Then, with a calm breath and a still hand, she clicked the share button on Facebook. No caption, just the article. By the end of the day, it had been reshared over 300 times. At the foundation office, Whitney's phone wouldn't stop ringing. The executive board wanted an emergency meeting. 2 sponsors had pulled out, one citing reputational risk, the other ethical ambiguity. Her assistant, trembling, handed her a printout of a statement from a vendor she'd partnered with just last quarter. "We were unaware of any misrepresentation in past affiliation. We are suspending all influencer collaborations until further notice." Whitney threw her phone across the room. It hit the bookshelf with a dull, humiliating thud, bouncing off the spines of books she hadn't read but used to photograph. She pulled up the article. The byline made her stomach turn. "Research Assistance by Joy Harmon." She hadn't seen that coming. And Grace? Not a word. Not a public statement. Not a private jab. Just the article, quiet and devastating. At home, Brian was in the dining room, laptop open, files spread across the table. "Can we talk?" Whitney asked. He didn't look up. "Already did." "Brian." He held up a document. "I'm filing for financial independence from the joint, splitting saving, pulling my name from any investments registered under your..." She blinked. "You're leaving?" "I'm untying," he said, eyes steady. "There's a difference." Her mouth opened, but he was already walking away. The PTA meeting 2 days later was supposed to be uneventful. Budget discussions, planning the fall festival. Lena's class was up for cider duty. Whitney had planned to sit quietly, regroup, prove she still had community standing. That didn't happen. Someone asked about the foundation raffle. Then someone else brought up the article. A third asked if Lena's name could be removed from a donation form Whitney had posted to Instagram last spring, one that now felt exploitative. Whitney stood to speak. What came out wasn't measured or polished. It was sharp, defensive. Her voice cracked mid-sentence. She waved her hands. She snapped at someone in the third row. She accused a teacher of bias. She mentioned cancel and jealous small-town thinking. Someone in the front row recorded it all. The video was online before she'd even made it back to her car. Whitney Palmer melts down at PTA. "This is character assassination." By morning, the video had over 60,000 views. The comments were worse. Grace didn't watch the video. She sat in her garden pulling weeds and trimming back the lavender bushes before the frost could get to them. Her phone buzzed on the patio. Texts from Joy, Pastor Dennis, even Brian, all saying the same thing. "Did you see?" She didn't need to. She already knew. Some people crumble in silence. Others implode in full view of the town square. And Whitney? She wasn't just unraveling. She was broadcast. Grace sat at her desk, scrolling through her phone while the kettle warmed behind her. Morning light spilled across the hardwood, and outside, the garden was starting to blush with the earliest edge of autumn. She'd planted asters last week, strong, reliable blooms, the kind that outlast the frost. She opened the Facebook app. Settings, privacy, blocked accounts. Whitney Palmer, blocked since March of last year. Grace hovered for a moment, thumb still, then tapped unblock. A warning popped up. "Are you sure?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." Let her look. Let her see everything. She posted an album 30 minutes later. Title, Late Notes, Early Route. A photo of Lena, standing by the piano in the music room, bow in hand, grinning without restraint. A candid from the community mentoring circle, one of the widows laughing mid-story, tea in hand. A picture of the first pumpkin to ripen in the garden, sunlight catching on the curve like glass. No caption, just light. Across town, Whitney was still in bed, wrapped in her designer sheet, the curtains drawn, her phone chimed. She hadn't slept well, not since the video, not since the article, not since she opened Instagram and found her followers had dropped by. She clicked the notification, expecting another scathing tag. Instead, she saw Grace Palmer, public post, viewable again. She blinked, sat up straighter. It was real, unblocked. She clicked the album, scrolled slowly, every image intentional and devastating. Her hand hovered over the like button. She didn't tap it. Instead, she went to her call log. Brian, she dialed. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Later that evening, Lena uploaded a photo of her own, crayon and watercolor, a child's drawing, posted to her small private account, but already shared by a proud neighbor who followed her art page. It showed a house on a hill, trees all around it, a sun with rays so wide they spilled out of the edges. In front stood two figures, one tall, one smaller, both smiling. The caption, in Lena's handwriting, "Me and Nana's new house." Grace saw it and left a heart emoji. Whitney saw it and didn't breathe for a full 10 seconds. That weekend, Grace opened her front door and found a box on the welcome mat. A florist's ribbon, cream-colored roses, no card. She didn't bring them inside. She carried the arrangement down the steps, past the garden, and laid them gently into the compost. Not with malice, not with drama, just intention. On Sunday, Grace updated her nonprofit page with a photo of the reading room, 2 new chairs, a tray of lemon squares, a printed flyer taped to the bookshelf. Grief doesn't go away, but it grows quieter when it has company. By Monday morning, the post had 1,200 shares. At 11:04 a.m., Whitney texted her, just one word, "Please." Grace didn't reply. Joy was sitting at the kitchen table later that afternoon, flipping through grant paperwork when she looked up and asked, "You going to block her again?" Grace shook. "No. Why not?" Grace poured another cup. Because silence echoes louder when it has somewhere to land. She looked out the window as the wind picked up in the let her hear it. The pen moved slowly, deliberately, each letter written with the precision of someone who knew the weight of. Grace sat at the dining table, the same one where she'd once eaten frozen dinners alone in the early days of the rebuild. The late afternoon light filtered through the kitchen window, casting long golden bars across the polished oak. The notary waited patiently across from her, flipping pages of the witness affidavit, unmoved by the softness of the moment. On the table, a single document rested under Grace's her will. It was simple. The house, the garden, the car, the savings account, the investment share in Ethan's senior living project. 50% would go directly to Lena Palmer when she turned 25. The other half would be absorbed into the Palmer Community Foundation, earmarked for local education and widowed family support. No middlemen, no surprises, no secrecy this time. Grace signed the final line, initials looping like a quiet signature on a life reclaimed. The notary slid her copy into a folder, stamped and certified. "Would you like me to deliver this to your attorney?" "No," Grace replied. "I already sent the digital filing to the public record office." The woman raised an eyebrow. "You're filing it publicly?" Grace nodded. No one deserves to wonder what. That evening, Ethan dropped by with a bottle of red and a printout of building permits for the senior center. "I brought wine," he said, holding it up, "but I have a feeling you've already had your victory." Grace gestured to the folder on. "I wrote the will today." He didn't touch the wine. Instead, he stepped forward and placed a hand on the back of the nearest chair. "You've turned pain into power," he said quietly. Grace didn't smile. "No. I just stopped asking for permission to exist." 2 days later, Grace sat at the farthest row of folding chairs in the multi-purpose room at Lena's elementary. The walls were decorated with paper leaves for the fall assembly, and the sound system crackled as the principal introduced the next student. Lena stepped up to the mic. She was wearing a navy cardigan and boots slightly too big for her. Her hair was braided with gold ribbon. "I want to talk about the strongest woman I know," she began, her voice shaking only on the first line. "She doesn't run a business. She doesn't live in a mansion. She doesn't care how many people follow her." The room went still. "She's strong because she listens, because she remembers things no one else does, because she makes people feel like they matter. She grows things, like flowers, like people, like me." Grace didn't move. Lena's eyes scanned the room once, slowly, searching, and then, at the very back, she spotted her. Just a flicker of recognition, a tiny breath of a smile. "And I hope," Lena said, "that when I grow up, I can be a little bit like her, just exactly how she." Applause followed. Teachers beamed. Cameras clicked. Grace stood quietly before the room emptied and slipped out the side door. Outside, The wind tugged at the edge of her coat. The parking lot smelled like warm leaves and cafeteria apple. She didn't need to speak. Lena had done it for her. The issue hit shelves on a Wednesday. West Valley Living, glossy and trimmed in seasonal golds, had Grace's house on the cover. The headline read, "Legacy, built with intention, one woman's quiet reclaiming of space." Inside were full spreads of the music room, the community reading lounge, the kitchen designed around wide-open hosting. There were quotes from Joy about programming, and even a two-line mention of the senior center Grace had helped co-fund. There was only one photo of Grace herself, on the back patio, leaning over a planter of rosemary, sleeves rolled up, wind tugging at her hair. It wasn't posed. It was powerful. Whitney saw the magazine at a nail salon. She had come in unannounced, without an appointment, hoping to escape a morning of silence and unanswered texts. She hadn't expected the receptionist to hand her a complimentary copy and say, "She's a client here too. Nicest woman in the world." Whitney didn't finish her manicure. She left before the polish dried. 3 days later, Grace heard the tires on gravel before she saw the car. She glanced through the window. A black Escalade. Not Whitney's usual. Inside were 3 people. Whitney, her father, shoulders stiff in a golf vest. Her mother, chin tilted at that high angle that mistook scrutiny for class. Grace stepped away from the window. Let them come. The front door was open to guests that day, a scheduled tour for community partners interested in replicating the nonprofit model. Joy handled the walkthrough, offering hot cider and softly spoken explanation. Whitney and her parents blended in awkwardly among the group. Her mother whispered something about the crown molding. Her father trailed a step behind, distracted by the photos of Grace with city council members lining the hallway wall. They entered the community wing. The music room was warm, filled with quiet piano chords as Mrs. Langley worked with a student. The reading room glowed under lamplight, a pair of widows thumbing through a recipe book on the coffee table. No one looked surprised to see Whitney, but no one looked eager either. One guest, a middle-aged woman in a cable-knit sweater, turned to Whitney's mother with a kind smile. "You must be so proud of your daughter-in-law." Whitney opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her face flushed, the exact red that travels from the chest upward when words jam at the throat. Her mother gently squeezed her hand, misreading the silence. Whitney's father turned, his gaze finally locking on the large photo mounted above the fireplace. Grace and Lena in the garden, holding up a row of painted seed markers, both laughing like there wasn't a single eye watching. He said nothing. From behind them, the front door closed with a soft click. Grace stepped into the room, wearing slate blue and pearl earrings. She wasn't rushed. She wasn't theatrical, just composed. She walked up beside the woman in the cable knit, placing a hand gently on her shoulder in greeting, then turned to face Whitney. "Still forgotten?" she asked softly. Whitney's throat moved as if to answer, but again, nothing. Grace didn't wait. She nodded once, calmly, to the group. "If you'll follow Joy, she'll show you the garden next. Some of the newer plots have just come. It's been a good season for regrowth." The guests followed, murmuring approval, drifting toward the French doors that opened to the porch. Whitney remained still. Her parents quiet, seeing a house not just made of stone and paint, but of decisions they could never undo for her. Grace turned once more and met Whitney's eyes, then looked past her, and walked away. The ground was soft from last week's rain, still holding the scent of earth and new beginning. Grace pressed her foot gently onto the edge of the shovel, driving it deeper into the garden bed as Lena steadied the small tree beside her. The young sapling, bare-limbed and hopeful, stood between them like a promise waiting to be rooted. Neither of them spoke for a while. The wind moved quietly through the yard, tugging at the hem of Lena's sweater and scattering dry leaves across the path. Grace could hear the faint hum of distant traffic, a dog barking 2 streets over, and the steady, rhythmic rustling of the garden settling into fall. When the hole was finally ready, Lena crouched down, slid the sapling into place, and pressed her palms gently into the soil. Grace joined her, both sets of hands moving in unison, covering roots with care rather than haste. "What should we name it?" Lena asked, brushing a strand of hair out of her face, her cheek smudged faintly with. Grace glanced at the little tree, its trunk thin but upright. "Forgiveness," she said softly. Lena smiled, still crouched beside it. "That's a good name." Grace stood, brushing the soil from her knees, but not forgetting. There was a pause. Lena looked up, eyes serious, older than her age. "I know." Behind them, the back door creaked. Ethan stepped out onto the porch with a bottle of red wine tucked under one arm and a set of glasses dangling from his fingers. Joy followed him, balancing a plate of crackers and cheese, laughing at something Brian had apparently just muttered behind her. Brian, bringing up the rear, carried a pie dish with one oven mitt still on his hand, as if he'd forgotten it was there. The group settled onto the back porch like they'd done it 100 times before. Ethan poured wine without asking. Joy kicked off her shoes and folded her legs beneath her on the outdoor sofa. Brian placed the dessert on the small table, pulled off the mitt, and waved it dramatically like a magician revealing his final act. Grace and Lena joined them slowly, their hands still streaked with garden dirt. Grace didn't bother to change. She liked the way her clothes, lavender from the bushes and a hint of pine. She liked the way Lena leaned into her without needing to say anything. The conversation shifted easily from nothing to everything. Community projects, old memory, what needed fixing. Joy teased Brian about the pie crust. Ethan outlined a new idea for a mobile resource van that could serve rural scenes. As the sun slid lower, the shadows stretched long across. Somewhere nearby, church bells rang out the hour, slow, warm, familiar. Grace leaned back in her chair, legs folded under her, wine glass resting lightly in one hand. Her cardigan had slipped off one shoulder, but she didn't fix it. The air was cool but kind. The breeze moved through the garden like a prayer no one had to say aloud. From the porch, she could still see the sapling. Forgiveness. Its leaves were barely hanging on, but the roots were deep now. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to sleep or escape, but simply to feel the quiet without needing to fill it. This life, she thought, was not a revenge story. It was a restoration. A soft voice spoke beside her. "Are you okay, Nana?" Grace turned to find Lena looking up at her, eyes wide and curious, waiting for the answer. Grace placed her hand gently over Lena's. "I'm more than okay," she said. "I'm home." The others were laughing again, something about Joy replacing all the labels in Brian's spice rack to test his palate. The porch light clicked on as the sky turned a dusky rose. No one rushed to. In the stillness that followed, Grace allowed herself one last thought, quiet, sure, and earnest. "I didn't ruin her," she revealed herself. And as the wind picked up and carried the laughter across the yard, she smiled to herself and whispered, just under her breath, "Next time someone writes me off, I hope they use pen."